Good morning and welcome. I am Brandon McIntyre from TrussedAI, and I will be leading our conversation with my co-moderator, Tarun Batra from Gruve. Let me say one thing up front. Trust and Gruve both work in AI governance. That's exactly why the four people on this panel are the ones that will be talking today. No one is selling anything in the next hour. If it starts to sound like a demo, I would ask for our panelists to say so. On format, this is a roundtable, not a webinar. 4 leaders from the insurance and healthcare industry, 60 minutes, no slides. We will be covering 3 topics rather than racing through 8, because in a conversation like this, the useful part is almost never the first answer. It is the second one. So we have built in room for it. 2 requests for our panelists. If you disagree with each other, please do it out loud and respond to each other directly rather than waiting for me or Tarun to call on you. I would rather referee than interview. For everyone watching, send questions in as they occur. We will be saving them for the end. We will be holding the last 10 minutes. And we will get to as many of those as we can. That said, Tarun, let me hand this over to you to introduce the 4 people who will unpack this for us.
All right. Thank you, Brandon. I want to thank our panelists that have joined us. Let me introduce them so that we can get started. We have Randy Stodard, who is the CMO of Delta Dental of New Jersey. We have Archana Jain, former Group CTO of Zurich Insurance. We have Elinor Mackinnon, fractional CIO, CTO at Stratafusion, and Krista Rappaport, who's the General Counsel at NCOIL. The first 3 panelists, will be asking questions, and for each of the topics we cover, Krista will provide the regulatory read and expertise based on what she's heard from the panelists. With that, we can get started. The first topic is around the adoption governance gap. And the focus is how is AI is being used across organizations right now. Which team is running it first, and did it happen by plan or by momentum? So my first question is to Randy. Delta Dental is a consumer-facing insurer with a strong marketing organization. What is actually in use on your team today, and how much of it started before there was a plan for it?
So we use AI a lot on my team. We started out using it for more administrative type things, like drafting documents. And that was the beginning experimentation, and gone to using it to help shape our customers' experiences and try to improve them. And a lot of projects underway with that.
Archana, you have operated AI at a global scale across many models, multiple clouds, and several regulatory regimes at once. Kind of speaking generally about what that takes. How do you operationalize AI beyond pilots, and what do the organizations mostly underestimate in that area?
Yeah. So before I answer, just want to make sure that I create a distinction between the pilot and production. In pilot, it's very contained. You have your clean set of data. You are trying to test the value and see, does AI do exactly what it's supposed to do? Since it's a very contained environment, and once you prove it and you unleash it into production, then you realize that the data in real life could be very different. So, there are many things that you need to take care of. First and foremost is from a change management perspective when you move to production. During the pilot, a smaller set of people are involved. And in production, you are trying to roll it out to a larger number of people. And if they have not been engaged in appropriate change management, inclusion, training has not been done, people are going to revert back to their manual processes because they'll find reasons where it doesn't work. So that's number one, which people overlook a lot because pilot is just 10% of the work. 90% work is scaling in production. So after the change management is done, there are a lot of things that you need to take care of. You test it with a small set of data. It'll work for that data. You don't know how it's going to behave. So you need to have appropriate monitoring to see that it's getting the results that you expect it to. And over time, it could drift. 2 years ago was the right output, may not be the right output now. Think about if you were doing an underwriting and now the wars happened and, everybody knows about that, and then the situations change. Or if you look at 2 years ago, how people used to go to work or not go to work, and now companies are mandating 3 to 5 days a week coming to work. So if you look at the road conditions, the vehicles, so if you're doing the insurance for vehicles, your underwriting is going to change. So it's overall the conditions keep changing, model could drift. So you got to keep the appropriate amount of monitoring in there. And then you're expecting certain things that, or you should expect that certain things model cannot handle. How are you going to take care of those edge cases? And how are you going to prove to audit that, yeah, we expected this to happen and did it really happen? So all those things need work, and people don't realize it's 90% of the work which happens between pilot and before you can completely roll it out into production. And also, you can't build a model for one area and then expect it to work everywhere else. Geography changes, rules, regulation changes. Even in US, if you look at each state has different type of regulations. And then if you build a model, I'll just give you an example, for the conditions in India, it'll never work in Norway. Look at the number of people, look at the... So it's just very, very different. So you got to take care of a lot of things as you do a global rollout.
Okay. Thank you, Archana.
Can I ask Archana a question just before we leave there? So what I find very interesting about that, I agree with you 100%, is this sort of what's different about it. And, as a CTO, what does that mean to infrastructure in terms of what can stay the same, or does it become more unique based on the use cases and where you're doing it? Like, we always search for commonality, right? In infrastructure, for example, in terms of how things operate. So I'd be interested to hear what that means to infrastructure.
See, from a framework perspective, you want to make sure that you build it such that it can be reused across every region.
Mm-hmm.
And every use case. You want to make sure that you are building capabilities like I could change the model underneath, but the way the model is invoked remains the same. So people who are building the models, they don't really need, they could be building a different model and changing it underneath, right? Secondly, you want to make sure the guardrails that you are building is built by the same infrastructure technical team. How do you look at permissions? How do you look at building audit? How do you monitor it? How do you writing the logs and everything, right? All those things from an infrastructure perspective, you are building and you are reusing it at every use case. But the model itself could be different for different geography, because the data and the environment is different.
I think one thing that's striking about this initial discussion is the prudential nature of how things are done in healthcare and in insurance, because it's a safety net. And for years in the 80s, mainframe and computers were doing the first modeling and the first AI, very much not the 2022 and onward AI. And I think what we're hearing here sometimes is not seen or not appreciated by new insurtechs who have extreme optimism. I mean, the sky is purple and pink. Lots of risk taking and free market drive. And as the mom of young adults, I'm very much into hearing all the new ideas, but we must mix these with prudential considerations.
Absolutely agree with that.
Randy, I will go back to you and see, what are you doing today? How did it start? And was it planned, or was it, kind of a grassroots growth of some of these AI use cases that you implemented?
For sales and marketing, most of our initial use cases were related to administrative functions, drafting a press release or creating a benefits table.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's progressed to trying to do things like change 800 different documents with new insurance rates at the same time. without having to spend 5 weeks doing it like we used to in the past. And then it's evolved to a third level, which is starting to get into the customer experience and how can we use AI to improve the customer experience? How can we anticipate their needs, understand what they're looking at when they're looking at it and what they would probably want to see next. And, with that, a lot of predictive modeling to try to predict how we can move someone through the process or when we might lose them and how we can keep them.
Okay. Great.
So Randy, what phase? So it kind of sounds like your path has been like 3 phases so far.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of interested to understand, what is next and the speed at which those things are changing. And what's next? Are you able to think about what phase 4 is going to be before it's there, if you know what I'm asking?
Well, I think there's, of course, there's virtual agents and all those kinds of things that have been around for a while. I think the process between, in our business, we've got 4 customers is what I always say. We have the provider, the dentist, we have the broker, we have the group or the HR manager, and then we have the individual who could be buying on their own an individual or family plan, or they could be getting coverage through their company. So the key next thing, I think, is trying to figure out how to better integrate and create the flow of data between all 4 entities, because it allows for better outcomes if you can connect someone's patient records with, other areas, and you can do better things for them. So I think that's one of the key things next. That's when you get to the level of, some real heavy duty security concerns and, HIPAA information and governance. That's when that level, I think, is when it really, gets tricky.
Right. The next question is for Elinor. Elinor, you work with many organizations. Some of them are starting on their AI journey. Some are midway. And in your experience, when you work with them, what do you see? How much AI is already running that nobody decided to deploy?
Nobody agreed or approved it, but and so you have to sort of dig to find out really what's going on, right? Well, I think, my background is similar to Randy's in some ways. I've spent some time in financial services, but really over the past couple of decades, it's been in healthcare, the payers mostly, and then insurance, auto, home insurance, for example. And I think, the coming into that point of view just broadly is, which I still agree with, is that these are enterprises or businesses that are process driven and run by process. And so people talk about products and things, but honestly, the way these functions work, these businesses work, is very process driven. And what I see is the opportunity is there. One of the things that's really still challenging, love to hear what Randy has to say about this, is because so many of these processes have been manual and because there are control points with people verifying things, for example, I think the challenge is getting people who are used to the processes to a different mindset of sort of what I'll call, end-to-end process that's automated versus the manual intervention all along the way. So I see that, and I do see similarities to what Randy is describing, especially on that journey, and how it just strikes me when I would say how rapidly it's changing where the focus is and the sequence in which it happens. And then, Randy, your comments really about EHR, and EHR kind of was born, 12, 14 years ago, whenever it was. And it's, we're still, kind of working our way through that, trying to find a good way to get there. And then when it comes to dealing with patients and their information, there's a lot of protection and security and other things that need to go in there, as well as disclosing, to patients, like they go for a checkup or what do they do, and can we record what we're saying to you, all these kinds of things that happen. So, I would say that, healthcare, I want to defend healthcare insurance. I think, back in the early days, people poo-pooed them. I saw lots of this. It's like, oh, they're so far behind, they're old-fashioned or whatever. And what I saw was a more planful path forward, and I still see that, about the places where it can help. Maybe people are a little more conservative about sort of rushing too far into things. But I think that's okay, because I think what's being protected here really matters a lot. I am interested, sort of, it's a little bit of like what's next question always seems to come up. And so that's why I was interested in Randy's comments about, what's the next phase going to look like? It's going to be here. We'll know it when we see it. Maybe that's how it's going to work.
I think that's why the National Council of Insurance Legislators, NCOIL, we're very happy to have URAC come and present their AI methodology and certification for healthcare entities. And because it's taking into account the protection of data, the running the course, making sure that there is testing and validation, all the really boring bits that make for a better product and a better experience for everyone involved.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to Archana for her quick thoughts on, as organizations are deploying AI, who do you think should own once AI is in production and full scale?
Okay. Who should it? Let me start with when AI was, especially when we got the new wave of Gen AI, and we needed to make sure we experiment and then we figure out how things really work and what are the pitfalls. Having the technology team take a lead in there and doing it centrally in an organization, do the findings that made sense, because we want to make sure we are not exposing ourselves externally with any breaches or any other impact. And once you understand centrally from a technology team and they build the guardrails, and then of course it should be democratized across the company, right? That's the way to go about doing it. Now, specifically owning a particular use case, let's say, take an example, if it's a claim or underwriting or any of the use case, the technology team cannot own it, because soon there will be hundreds and thousands of cases eventually in future, right?
Right. Yeah.
So the person or the group which owns the process or owns the outcome needs to start owning the model and owning the impact. So, of course, they would need help from technology. Technology will continue to own the framework and providing all the functions they need. They would still need to work with risk and security and regulations and everything. They just need to make sure that they can build, and they can look at what are the thresholds that they should allow the model to do. But at some point, they need to make the decision. If it's a claims, should I allow, less than 2,000 to be done by the agent because I'm comfortable, and then not, 50,000, 100,000 to be to be processed completely by the agent without human oversight.
Right.
So from an ownership perspective, I think it slowly keeps, it just moves to the business owner.
Thank you, Archana. Since we are on the topic of insurance, I'm going to ask Krista. Krista, you just went to the NAIC summer meeting, and
that's right.
What are the 2 or 3 big takeaways for insurance, and was there anything that was surprising to you?
Okay, so first of all, we did get an update on the NAIC pilot. It's the risk evaluation supplemental pilot. And in that, there's 12 states. There's California, Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Iowa, Louisiana, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, Virginia, and Wisconsin. And this started June, July, will end in November. And this is really what is looked at during financial exams, which for large companies are every 3 years. It's every 4 to 5 years for smaller companies, or in market conduct exams. And I think what I thought there was a maturation of questioning and expectations, because it became this, what is the real question when we're looking at AI governance? Well, is the use within clear limits? Can you see how it's behaving? Can you stop it? Can you reverse AI? Can you recover when it's needed? And as systems change and autonomy grows, human oversight will be harder. So if they didn't talk about it there, but one concept that an engineer friend told me about is, everyone's talking about black box design, and people are, I think the regulators are getting tired of hearing a vendor say, I can't tell you. I have intellectual property concerns. I can't say anything. So then you're limited with looking at input and outputs. I think they didn't say this here, but my engineer friend tells me, we need to start thinking of white box design. This is design allows you to poke around intermediate reasoning points and look at what's happening. So we're going to need to have more responsibility, especially it's one thing when technology is internal, but as we're relying more and more on external third-party vendors, there's going to be an impatience with that. Right now, it's don't say who we are, don't register us, don't do anything. And that is unsatisfactory. NAIC said there's going to think about a model. And so that was a surprising thing that now regulators are saying, we respect your right to have proprietary information. We respect your and understand the wish to keep intellectual property protected. However, when you can't just say, stop, don't look, there's the wizard, like the Wizard of Oz, don't look behind the screen, don't look at what's happening. No, there has to be some points in the process where we can look at this. And also that companies are going to be expected to grow their governance and change their governance appropriately given what they're doing and what's being done and what is the impact.
Hey, Krista, can I ask you a question? I'm not close to NAIC at this point, but will they or would they take on a role of sort of a certification for third parties like you're describing, which is, I understand, obviously their reluctance. I think they overblow it. Maybe there's not so much magic inside that black box that they think there is. Yeah. But, right. So a little bit of pantomime or whatever happening there. Yeah. But I do think in some industries and with some organizations, they've kind of created this certification program. Now, I know a lot of it can feel like it's just paperwork, and I get that. But, a body like NAIC, in that sense, should be able to protect their, what's unique about theirs, but have transparency to what's being done to meet whatever specific requirements are, right, of sort of blessing it as being acceptable and sufficiently, I don't know, use the word safe, if that's the right word, but, aligns with what NAIC wants to do or is there to do for insurance, for example.
And great question. And for those you don't know, NAIC refers to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Right. And all 56 U.S. jurisdictions, including places like Guam and U.S. Mariana Islands, are members of this. And so I think what the discussions have been, not that, traditionally you have licensees and the chief animal has been the insurance company, right? And then if I'm an insurance company and I want to sell personalized auto, it's very complex to do. So I was able to buy certain components that made up my product from what are called RSOs, Rate Service Organizations, like Verisk. It used to be called ISO, Insurance Service Office, and it's still referred to that a little bit. And so those RSOs were licensed enough themselves, and they had different requirements and structure to have that license. Now we can go to anything from using Anthropic or whatever to help with products. I think it's NAIC's big and powerful. It's 500 employees, and they really do act as like a business processing organization and support for many parts of the industry. But I think it's probably beyond their scope to do this. What they have been looking at, and what is historical, is to look at the insurance company, the chief licensee, as responsible. So when it comes to times having the risk evaluation, it is looking at the insurers like, are you doing these things? What is your governance? And then there's their concepts. What is difficult from the insurer side is that they're saying, okay, we expect a third-party vendor to perform functions X and Y. We don't know how it's done, but we test the output, and we know nothing more than that. And when it comes to like filing a product like homeowners, like a California homeowners policy, I think it's the regulators are getting annoyed with being asking basic questions that a human could answer in the past about their rates, their forms, their rules, the application. Being told this is a black box and it's proprietary is not going to be enough. There's going to be, like when I said that white box design, where you're going to have points where the regulator can see what was the decision making, what were the questions, what were the requirements, what were the standards. And so I think there's a maturation that NAIC can't be a credentialing like URAC. URAC used to be Utilization Review Authorization Committee, and now it's doing like so many things. But I encourage all to look at the URAC standards. Everyone on this call is familiar with NIST and all the other standards, but if for companies starting out and are not familiar, that the fact that there are various things that guide us, and that always has been the case. If I'm making an apple pie, I'm still looking at the crust recipe and I'm looking at the filling recipe. And so there's always going to be some level of documentation for those who want to fly free and have nothing. Well, God bless you. It's not going to happen.
So that's a good segue to our next topic. So let's actually start talking about what happens when stuff goes wrong. So cyber insurers are writing shadow AI exclusions into 2026 renewals. HHS has signaled that HIPAA breach investigations will scrutinize AI systems touching PHI. So let's be specific on this one. Like, what is the actual risk that's actually on our minds right now?
Well, I'll make a couple of comments here. First of all, I wanted to mention, because of what Archana was talking about here, is there's lots of people talking about this notion of the chief AI officer, and the value, is it a thing? And I saw, I think, some statistics, right, that it's gone from 10% to 70% or whatever. And so, if listening to Archana, everybody, so the pace at which this changes, I do question the role of this being a long-term thing versus sort of a passing phase, and whether it's a good fit or not in there. So, I'm not. I think if they really understand it and put together a proper strategy, I think that would be very helpful. And then I think your other question, Brandon, was just remind me again on where you were going with your other question, Brandon.
Oh yeah, so we're talking about what actually goes wrong, right? So
right.
Yeah, what is the risk that's actually on your mind right now?
Yeah, well, so I think what goes wrong is when you try to isolate it into a function, like the chief AI officer is kind of how I got there here, sorry, and some assumption that you can contain and control it that way, and that you can, I don't know, grow it from there. It's not what I see happening, and those things tend to be isolated and too isolated from the reality of what's going on in the operations. What people are doing on their own. I mean, it's a consumerized technology already, right? And so, what value is it providing to isolate? So I'm not a fan of the isolation. I'm not saying there couldn't be a role for that, but I'm not a fan of the isolation, because I think everybody in the company is using it one way or another and should use it one way or another. And I think time is better spent in teaching people, how to use it, what not to trust, how do you think about prompts? Good critical thinking skills matter, right? If you can go into a long...
Elinor,
yeah, go ahead, Krista.
I say I agree. It's no different than the financial statements. which are done quarterly, and the chief financial officer has to certify that they have talked to all these departments. And so even though the buck starts at the top, that is requiring a governance structure and activities to make sure that things are being done the correct way.
Correct. And I don't think that people know exactly what to test for in that sense at this point, Krista.
Yeah, I think when I don't know about you all, but one thing that many things, especially when I was looking at things like the MIT Data Media Center, Joy Bolimi I think I was probably murdering her name, but she talks about, is our data itself. You're like, where's the data from? Is this accurate? Are there a lot of assumptions? And insurance, we are exempt from the Fair Credit Reporting Act, where people have to have the right to correct things. So not having that and having the existing insurance laws, which are govern this area, are we so sure that the data that is the basis for making many decisions is kosher? That's something that worries me.
Right. I mean, if I were a CIO facing that, I think just across the board, I don't know that Archana said it this way, but I would be focused on sort of the protection of the exterior in a sense, to the extent you can stop things from getting in, like protect the environment you have. Because what comes with AI is a lot of security risks, and you can't lock everything down inside. So you kind of got to go a little bit back, if it's not quite the right word, but to sort of that protecting what you have, number one, first, because you can't just lock everything down and control things with people and tell them they can't do this and they can't do that. Those days are gone, right?
Can I ask a silly question? Okay, so back in the day, I was at a global insurance group, and we, went to the data center. You had a situation room and a war room, and you had like 100 computer scientists seeing what type of risk and viruses were coming in, and seeing who's entered and whether keeping them from anything that's NIST triggering, so they don't have to report, reportable that is. Is that something we're going to have to come back to, having like a bevy of soldiers to protect?
Krista, I think what you are talking about is we used to lock down everything with firewalls, and that was sufficient at that time. But now we are moving to zero trust security from a NIST side. That's where being driven is. You're looking at every single user. Are they supposed to be doing this for every access they do? We check their permissions. So it's like, even though you are within the firewalls, are you really authorized to make a payment? Or are you really authorized to review this? Or are you even authorized to view a customer data, right? So we are going towards locking down everything, checking before every action happens. So we've got to build that at an agent level also. Agent would be like every single aspect that you're expecting an agent to do, whether it is collecting data or making a decision or even taking an action, calling an API, whatever it is that they're doing. Do they have permission to do it? I think we're going that granular.
What do you guys think is a risk that's overblown right now? And what do you think like one that is underreported? What do you think the real problem is as we move to an era where we have MCP, where they have credentials that are hard coded into a bunch of different systems? You've got models that have access to all this data. Things are fundamentally changing, right? So what do you guys think, in your view, are like the risks that people are looking at and aren't looking at?
I would just say start with the third parties. I mean, Archana would know this from a security point of view. We know there's been a trend where the penetration and the access is via third parties, and third party management. I'll use that. MSPs, all these things are generally kind of managed more through a procurement process, and I'm not sure that process identifies the risks and keeps it up to date and looks at things, or perhaps there's not even a policy in place that says you need to come and disclose to us every 6 months if you've had incidents and what you've done about them, and are they remediated. Now, you don't get to sort of sit back and like hope that, and you don't even know that they know it's happening. So if I had to pick one as a place to start, that's what I would pick, Brandon.
So,
I have to say, okay, I would
can-
just add to that. One thing that from a regulators are going to expect companies to say, are your audit rights that are in the contract, are they even useful? Are you looking at this? Are your update notices reliable? Are procedures tested? Those are like some prudential things that are going to be required.
So I think Randy's back up. So let me throw it over to you for the final word here.
Yeah. So, I think one of the biggest challenges with AI from the business side, from the marketing and the sales side, is that there's a rapidly growing trust issue. And it's always been there. And, it goes all the way with people thinking that, as they do, Google shares data, that sort of thing. But it's being exasperated by the growth in AI to the point where, companies like the consumer or whoever the customer is, they want the benefits of AI. They want the speed, they want the personalization, they want the convenience. At the same time, they want transparency, fairness, and protection of their data. And I think the companies that are going to be successful with AI are the ones who close that trust gap while continuing to innovate with AI.
That's excellent.
Thank you. Wise word. So
Yep.
I'm going to throw this back over to Tarun. He's going to take us over to what all this means for the next year and the people who have to deliver it.
Yes. Thank you, Brandon. I'm going to start with Elinor. Elinor, you've been in the CIO role for many years, long time, many organizations. There is this new title that's getting steam, the Chief AI Officer, right? How is that different? Has the job changed, or is the CIO becoming a Chief AI Officer, or is it two different things?
Well, I think that's a bit, and it depends. I think I made some comments on this earlier. I think there could be a place for it. But if you ask me where that place would be, companies that already have something called a chief data officer, if I had to choose for a place to put it, I would combine it with that. Because again, I don't think more is better always. I think more is just more sometimes. And the more you're segmenting all these pieces apart and everybody's trying to write governance for what they do and trying to do this and trying to do that, instead of sort of democratizing it and letting everybody participate, it's actually sort of these like like narrow functions, right? That don't actually work together. So, I mean, there are companies out there and people out there with that title. I think I think kind of given the speed of AI, I think it will pass. That's maybe in some companies, it will persist, but I think it will pass.
Right. I'm going to go over to Archana. Archana, organizations are building AI at scale now, or so they claim, right? And where do you see the gap? Is there more of the technical talent or more of the governance side of things to make judgment calls and be able to, deploy it at scale?
In the beginning, I would say it was more on the technical side. People were still gathering and learning even within the organization, and people were in a hurry to hire the people who, the employees who can understand how algorithms work, because they really need to understand it before they get confidence that we can deploy that scale. Now I feel there are so many courses and there are people, it has started on the consumer side. People are already using it. They kind of know the advantages and people are eager to learn, and there are a lot of free material available to learn it. So I wouldn't say it's more from a technical perspective. I would say it's more from a domain knowledge. And I would say although it's more like common sense, but more like ethical sense that we need to make those judgment calls, and those can be made with people who really understand that domain really well, have gone through it for years. They need to make the decisions about, where can we use AI? Because we should not be using AI willy-nilly for every aspect, because it does certain things really well, and that's where it should be used. So they can make that judgment call, and once they go ahead and deploy it, even what type of cases do we allow them to start with? Where should the threshold be? What should we allow them? What are the edge cases that should always be directed to a human to verify? There is a threshold from a finance perspective that should be already, the AI can do certain work, but then should not make decision. It should just collect the data, kind of present the thought process and then leave it. But for certain conditions, it could still look at the data, make the decision, take an action, execute it in production, but it should still be reversible. Or it should also, they can make a decision. There are certain samples for these type of things which should be looked at. So we really need people who can provide that judgment, provide that, and have that domain knowledge to build it. So that's where I feel today that education needs to be provided to the people who already understand the domain.
Okay, great. The final question on this topic is for Krista. Krista, as organizations are building at scale, there's a new role for chief AI officers, the CIO, there is the domain experts. You are close to people who are actually writing the rules around regulations, right?
That's right.
What is coming that the group should be aware of, these organizations and these people in those roles? What should they be paying attention to that based on what you are seeing?
I think, many of them, especially Archana and Randy and Elinor, have all been very close to the financial examiners who come in. And there's going to be many conversations. These examinations take a year or 2 years, depending on how big the company is. And in that, they're going to be looking and expecting answers to what happens when the lightning bolt strikes. What happens when your underwriting results get skewed because things aren't right? Looking at your, are you ready for legislative scrutiny if there's a problem because you're denying all hail damage in like a place like Oklahoma? We see State Farm is going through that now. You have regulatory scrutiny both on the market conduct exam or in the financial exam, and there can be judicial scrutiny. We are in a private equity fueled litigation cycle, and so it's beholden to the industry to look at how you're using AI or anything, whether you're using artisanal chalk from Japan or you're using predictive modeling or agentic AI. How am I using it? What can go wrong? What critical decisions are being made and what's the impact? The regulators are going to expect you to think through everything. And it's not going to be enough to say, well, I use this agent. So, really, it's just, it is to use your brain and to critically think, as Elinor said. And and we see this in law firms when new law students were hired and they were relying on AI for everything and they could not think. They could not think in a deposition. They could not think in a meeting. Well, those who are senior, whatever, the executives are expected to think things through and to be able to defend, because it has to be transparent, it has to be trustworthy, and it has to be explainable.
So I'm going to go around the panelists and I'm going to throw out a question and I'll request each of the panelists to answer that in one sentence. Okay. So the people that are watching this discussion, what should we be doing differently starting Monday next week? I'll start with you, Randy.
From my world, as AI evolves so quickly, trust is the key thing that we're focusing on now in my department. Because if you can solve the problem of innovating at the same time, solve the problem of building trust, the trust becomes a competitive advantage versus companies that are not able to create that trust.
Right. Thank you. Elinor, your thoughts?
Well, that's a great answer. I would say I kind of take it to the executive level and the CEO level, and that is about ethics, which were mentioned, and it has to do with the how the company thinks about the values of the company, and how the values of the company and ethics kind of flow through the decisions that get made here. And so I don't think we're past this sort of like, oh my God, they're going to get rid of all the people, right? So if you look kind of down, you don't have to go down many levels, but that's kind of where people are. It's like, what does it mean to us? And I'm not convinced that enough companies have started at that level. A smart person told me recently is you should always ask the CEO, what are they most afraid of? And I think that would be a good thing to ask a CIO. And mostly what they're most afraid of is having to lay off people. So people and ethics matter a lot. And I think maybe that's relate to what Randy is saying about trust.
Right. Yeah. Archana, your thoughts?
I would say is, if you go back on and go to office on Monday morning, first thing you should look at is your framework. If that is solid, then you can build tons of things on it. But just go first, take a look at it. Is it industrial grade?
Okay. And Krista, finally, your thoughts on this?
Okay, I think I boil down to quality, which includes some things other people say. Do you have substantive due process and work? You procedural? If you can just check the box, but you're lacking ethics, who cares? I don't trust anybody. Trust but verify. And verify means doing the work.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I do want to say thank you to Randy Stodard, Archana Jain, Elinor Mackinnon, and Krista Rappaport. You all have been fantastic. Thank you all for the lively discussion, and especially a conversation that definitely did not settle for the easy version. So we appreciate the candor. Tarun, anything you want to add before we close?
No, I want to say thank you, and I learned a lot in this discussion today. And I think as AI evolves, so with the regulations, the trust and verify is going to be critical, and it is going to continue to evolve as AI becomes more and more mainstream and is applied throughout many business applications. So this was very useful for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you all. And for everyone who joined us, thank you for your time. We hope you got as much out of this as we did. Sorry we didn't get to your questions. We sent it along. We'll make sure it reaches the right person. But thank you everyone for all of your time. It was lovely talking to all of you.